The Secret Mage, Elice the Great, Book 1. For those with a storm inside, waiting to burst forth. Chapter 1. A tiny storm grew in her palm. Thin wisps of wind mixed with water molecules in the air to create a miniature cyclone. Elice sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor in front of her couch with her wide eyes fixated on her newest creation. Finally, after weeks of sneaking around to practice, she found the perfect balance of air and water. The low thud of Lenor's walking cane echoed through the cottage. Elice gasped and released her spell. The water and air stopped spinning around each other. As they separated, the air brushed past her hip-length curly hair while the water fell and splashed on the floor. Lenor appeared in the doorway to the living room. Elice glanced in her direction, knowing all too well that Lenor wore an ever-present scowl on her wrinkled face. She wondered if Lenor saw her using her magic. Elice wasn't a seer like Lenor, and reading facial expressions on the aged woman was near impossible, since she always had a look of disdain on her features. "Girl," Lenor called out, "grab my traveling bag." Her gray hair hung in thin strips from her head, barely long enough to reach the top of the silver necklace she wore over her floor-length brown frock. With a wrinkled hand, Lenor adjusted the talisman that swung from the end of the chain and gripped her wooden walking cane with her other shaky hand. Without another glance, the woman hobbled over to the small circular table in the corner of the room and carefully lowered herself onto one of the two wooden chairs. Elice stood from her spot beside the old couch. They rarely sat on it, and time took its toll on the structure and fabric. It looked like it would crumble with the slightest touch. She spent most of her time sitting on the floor anyway, closer to the ground where she could be closer to the earth. Having control of 3 of the 4 elements meant she had an acute awareness of nature and its properties. She walked toward the bookshelf near the couch, her dark curls bouncing with every step, and grabbed Lenor's large bag from the floor. She hesitated when she turned and saw the woman dozing off, her head lolling down to her chest. Slowly, Elice walked past the withered couch and her sleeping cot along the opposite wall. "Lenor?" she whispered, afraid to startle the woman as she slept. Lenor's beady eyes snapped open with a start and narrowed in on Elice's scrunched-up face. She snatched her bag from Elice's hands and tossed it on the table to rummage through it. Elice stood still for a moment as she watched Lenor dig through the contents of her bag. Lenor's wrinkled fingers pushed vials and other knickknacks around with a quivering hand. Elice did not like that Lenor would make the long journey to town to sell or trade their homemade crafts and trinkets alone. Even though the money she would make allowed her to buy food or other valuables, Elice knew how dangerous it was for the woman to travel by herself. But Elice couldn't leave their meager cottage. She was a prisoner in the secluded clearing deep in the Janai forest. She only knew of the world outside her home through books and stories Lenor would bring back from her travels. It was better this way, Lenor had warned. Time and again, Lenor would remind her she needed to stay in their home. She said Elice was better off sequestered from the world until she could learn to control her growing powers. Even though Elice understood this, she continued to stare at Lenor, a hint of longing attached to the fear of her leaving again. Each time Lenor took off, Elice would beg to go with her. She would tell Lenor she was finally ready to enter the world, that she had enough control of her magic to make the journey and be around other people for once. She would plead, promise, cry, and scream until Lenor simply put her foot down and told her no. Then she would leave, and Elice would be alone again. Lenor grabbed a sheet of paper that she had placed to the side on their cramped table and passed it to Elice. "Study," the woman said, her gravelly voice barely above a whisper. Elice took the paper and returned to her usual seat on the floor. She forced herself to read from the list. It had several techniques Elice needed to work on during Lenor's absence. Many included calming methods she still hadn't mastered, such as mind blocking and envisioning strategies. Since the law required all mages to control their powers, she needed to learn to push them down before they forced their way out. However, it proved to be a struggle to control it, and there weren't many resources available for Elice to learn from. Besides, it was not every day that a person was born able to control more than one element, let alone 3. She was in uncharted territory. Elice looked up from her paper and bit her lip to keep from bringing it up again. She wanted to point out how tired the old woman looked today, considering how frail and brittle her body was. As Lenor closed her bag and stood from the table to begin her long trek through the forest, Elice simply said, "Have a safe trip." Lenor grunted in response. "Keep your energy focused on your studies." She spoke over her shoulder, not bothering to turn around. Elice sucked in her bottom lip as Lenor shuffled her way to the door. Unable to hold in her objections any longer, Elice jumped and took a few steps toward Lenor. "I still think you shouldn't go." An extended silence rolled over them as Lenor stood still, anchored by her sturdy cane. Elice hesitated. The woman would get upset that Elice brought this up again, but she had to try. "At least," she continued, "not by yourself." This caused Lenor to turn around, using her cane to help her body move in a circle. "You're not ready," she said in a slow, almost pained tone, as if her voice wanted to give out. "But I feel ready," said Elice, grabbing a fistful of her tattered and stained off-white dress. "And it's not safe for you to travel all that way alone. What if something happens to you?" Lenor drew in a raspy breath. "It's not safe for you to be out there around all those people. I've been working so hard at controlling my magic. I think I'm finally ready to leave the cottage." "No. You haven't learned to conceal your magic yet." "Don't you think I can master it better when I'm actually exposed to real-life situations?" Elice argued. "You can't even have a conversation without acting like a child and letting your emotions overpower you." "I'm not acting like a child." Elice had to force her foot to stay still so she wouldn't stomp it on the ground. "Look at you," said Lenor with a hoarse voice, pointing at Elice with her free hand. "You're pouting and yelling like a baby, and the air around you is as thick as fog." Elice looked around and noticed her hands balled into fists. She loosened the grip on her frayed dress, and the moisture in the air dissipated. She hadn't even realized she was controlling the air and water around her to create the fog in the first place. "You are not ready," said the old woman, turning around and opening the door. She left without letting Elice say another word, shutting the door behind her. Elice sighed as she stared at the closed door. Feeling defeated, she grabbed her checklist again and went back to work on her techniques, though she couldn't focus. Her mind wandered to the words Lenor had always told her. "You are a danger to those around you," Lenor had always said. "You must concentrate on controlling your magic. Until then, you will stay in this cottage." So, Elice remained alone, attempting to suppress her innate powers, hoping Lenor would return in time for her birthday in 10 days.